Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight here to talk about the future of our community. My name is Winna McLaren. I'm the Director of Communication and Engagement for the City of Greeley. As many of you have witnessed, the City of Greeley is rapidly evolving, and the city as we experience today, what makes our community one of the major players in Colorado and in the state. We want to make sure that we understand the work ahead of us to continue being a leader in Colorado. As we look 10, 20, 50 years down the road, we want to be prepared for the growth that is already here, as well as the opportunities we have to ensure prosperity for the entire city of Greeley. Tonight's focus is on our future, specifically funding our future, to set ourselves up for success. City leadership has been working behind the scenes for over a year and has thought about the long-term and short-term needs that we're facing and what it would take to address them. We've been really mindful about how to efficiently address those needs, giving consideration to what's most pressing and urgent, as defined by you, the taxpayers, looking at the economic outlook of the nation and feasibility of what we want to accomplish. With all of that in mind, we've proposed potential 2024 ballot measures that Council is considering advancing to the ballot this fall. So this time and space for you all here tonight is to learn about what those potential ballot measures are and how they would directly benefit you. It's really important, especially to my team and the work that we do around engagement, for everyone to understand and have as much information as possible before heading to the polls in November. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First off, if for any reason you do get disconnected, no worry, this call is being recorded and you can access it online afterwards. Secondly, we want to be respectful of your time. So we do have city leaders on this call that will be able to answer questions, but we won't be taking questions during the program. We'll have dedicated time for Q&A afterwards. And finally, as we're running through the program, do feel free to drop your questions in the chat function, and then we will roll along and address those at the end. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're here tonight to learn about those potential 2024 ballot measures. It's no secret to everyone on this call that Greeley is growing. We are the fourth fastest growing MSA in the nation and still leading as one of the 10 largest cities in Colorado. Based on some of the latest projections, we expect to grow to 250,000 residents by 2050. So that's more than doubling our size in the next 30 years. And so with that growth that is already at our doorstep and showing no signs of stopping, we really want to think critically about how we should manage that growth, meeting some short-term needs as well as some of the long-term needs and impacts to our city with intention. So to that end, city leadership has put forth the two ballot packages that we'll talk a bit more depth into tonight for council consideration. And knowing what is most urgent and at the forefront of your minds out in the community. So to start off, our Driving Greeley package is actually two ballot measures rolled into one. I'll start with actually the debt issuance and then share more about the food tax. So come this fall, we hope to ask voters to approve a debt issuance that would allow us to take advantage of a long-term, low-cost federal financing program that will get us started on some major infrastructure projects today. Nobody likes traffic, so we are most urgently thinking about how to mitigate that today and then down the road as we know the growth will continue. This low-cost loan, however, does require a permanent repayment funding source, and so that is where the food tax comes in. The food tax has been strongly supported by voters for more than 30 years since it was first adopted, funding facility improvements, services for youth and the elderly, maintenances to our community throughout the facilities in our community. And the ask come this fall would be to not to create or raise taxes, but to permanently extend this tax so that it can serve as a repayment source for that loan. In order to qualify for the loan with rates as low as I believe 2% financing, we have to identify a permanent funding source to repay it. Altogether, I do want to reiterate that city leadership has been thoughtful in this approach to figuring out how to take on some of these major projects without dipping into taxpayer wallets. So together, Driving Greeley on that food tax as well as long-term loan would neither raise nor create any additional tax. taxes. And this time I'll pass it over to Diana Frick. She's a director of Culture, Parks, and Recreation Department to talk a little bit more about the food tax.
Thank you, Wenna. As Wenna mentioned, I'm Diana Frick. I'm the Director of Culture, Parks, and Recreation. As she mentioned, the citizens have been supporting the food tax for over 30 years in the community. This funding has historically been used to make improvements to public facilities, culture, park, and recreation improvements, and street maintenance. Currently, this tax is voted on in 5-year increments. The city may ask voters in 2024 to permanently extend the food tax to enable long-term planning, as we are currently limited to 5-year planning cycles. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates how the money has been spent over the last 5 years and the plans for the next 5 years. As you can see, the past 5 historical years, we spent over $11 million for road improvements, $11 million for recreation improvements, such as remodeling the locker room at the downtown rec center, upgrades to the Rodarte kitchen to improve our youth programming there, culture facilities such as Union Colony Civic Center and museums. We've also spent over $8 million in park improvements, items such as replacing play court surfaces, upgrading pools at Discovery Bay, repairs and additions to trails and natural areas are included in that number. Also, we've spent money on safe and accessible buildings, including ADA repairs, which means converting city facility bathrooms to ADA compliance, building ramps to access spaces, etc. We also spend about $745,000, which was about 2% of the money, for a rebate program to families that qualify for a rebate on the food tax. Additionally, we've spent $3 million in traffic safety and mobility. Going forward, the next 5 years, the city is predicted to spend about $70 million investing in improvements and expansions to city facilities, a large number of those being culture, parks, and recreation facilities. This allows for projects like park revitalization, expanding facilities such as the Funplex and Centennial Pool. The Funplex is just over 20 years old at this point, and we'd like to give it a refresh and keep it an exciting place for our citizens to come visit. Adding programming spaces to our active adult center, additional trail connections to help alleviate transportation system demands, as well as continued investment in our culture amenities such as Union Colony Civic Center. The city is focused on making improvements to facilities and programs to impact residents of all age groups, backgrounds, and interest levels. And now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Trombino, the Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Diana. As you just heard a little while ago, the city is considering using low-cost long-term financing, which would fund important transportation projects. The structure is very similar to a home mortgage, though this financing plan requires approval by the residents of Greeley. If passed, this financing can be done without increasing or creating new taxes, as the extension of the food tax would serve as the financing for the debt. Next slide. See, some key priorities for this funding include constructing interchanges along US 34 at 35th Avenue and 47th Avenue. This will significantly improve traffic flow and safety in our growing community. And in addition, Greeley's bus service will also expand with routes to Loveland, Denver, and the airport. As a result, all of this can be done, is possible without increasing or creating new taxes. I'll turn it over from here to Chief Brian Kustek.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Brian Kuznick, and I'm Fire Chief. I'm pleased to be with you tonight to speak to you about a public safety tax initiative that we've titled Protecting Greeley. I'm pleased to share that the Greeley Fire Department prides itself on providing fast and reliable service. In 2023, the Greeley Fire Department responded to 81% of all of our most serious calls in 5 minutes or less. Of the over 18,000 calls for service in 2023, we responded to 119 fires with 0 fire-related fatalities. In order to maintain this excellent level of service in a growing community such as Greeley, the fire department needs additional funding to keep our stations adequately staffed and our firefighters safe with the best possible equipment. I'll now turn it over to Police Chief Adam Turk.
Thank you, Chief Kuznick. My name is Adam Turk, and I'm the Greeley Police Chief. And thank you all for being here tonight. It means a lot to us. As in addition to protecting Greeley, it is the responsibility of the police chief and the fire chief, who are responsible for providing public safety services to our community, to think future forward. A lot of the planning and the things that we're working on are based on what Greeley and our citizens will expect from us in the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. And it's our responsibility to ensure that we provide those services moving forward. For example, last year, the Greeley Police Department responded to just over 70,000 calls for service. It was actually right around 76,000 calls. Of those calls, 22,737 were 911 emergency calls called into dispatch by our citizens for response from our officers. What we measure our metrics and how we're doing is based on response times to these life-threatening emergencies. And right now, our response time is right around 4.4 minutes to these priority 1 calls for service. When we talk about the future and how we're going to plan response times and where we're positioning and locating our officers is at the forefront of our minds. Next slide. So with a new public safety tax, with the increase, some of the things that we need to think about in regard to keeping our community safe, this would include additional staffing and enhanced staffing to reduce crime and improve community safety. We would obviously, with the growth to the west, the north, and other areas in town, we'd have to look at additional firefighters, police officers, and support staff. And this would also include not just hiring, but also retaining these officers and firefighters. We are going to continuously look at our alternative service delivery through our co-responders and our Squad 1 programs to deal with homelessness and mental health. And then we need to look at how we're going to station our officers and firefighters as we grow to the west with a potential substation. In addition to personnel and a physical location, technology, training, and equipment are expensive, as it goes with public safety. And technology is something we're already addressing, but we'll need to continue to address as we move to the future. I'm now going to turn it back over to Chief Kuznick.
Thank you, Chief Turk. It's important that I point out that the Protecting Greeley public safety tax will be an increase of 0.25%. This equates to 25 cents on every $100 you would spend. This increase will better position both the fire and police departments from being understaffed. Also, this additional funding will help ensure our firefighters and police officers are afforded the time and resources that are required for important training. As you can see in the center of the slide, increasing the tax by 0.25% would bring our total percentage to 0.41%. Our research has shown that even with an increase, Greeley's public safety tax would be at or below the levels of other Colorado communities. This further demonstrates that Greeley is efficiently putting its money to good use for the safety of our first responders and our community. Protecting our growing community at the level our citizens expect and deserve requires additional funding. I'll now turn it back to Winna.
Thanks, Chief Kuznick. Okay, we did want to get through that quickly to provide time for Q&A. Before we do that, I would be remiss if I didn't share come November, if these do make it to the ballot and not pass, some of the road bumps that we could see ahead. So first and foremost, when it comes to driving green, we want to avoid any delays in critical infrastructure facility updates, which only incur increased costs down the line and over time. We want to look our best and avoid deteriorating conditions that also add to costs and takes time and resources away from other major projects. We don't want any delays when it comes to road safety and safety improvements. And of course, we always want to avoid traffic during our commute and travel around town. When it comes to protecting Greeley, we want to avoid having underfunded police and fire departments. We know we're seeing an increased demand in services, an increased demand and the need for those services as we continue to grow. We want to keep our response times low, especially in those life-threatening emergencies. We want to make sure that we have the best trained and best equipped first responders to keep our community safe. And ultimately, when it comes to protecting Greeley, it all boils down to having a safe and secure community, which does require additional resources, both now and into the future. And with that, we will open it up for Q&A. As I mentioned, if you do have questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we will answer them as they come in. Okay, so it looks like our first question here, one of the leaders you didn't hear from tonight, but is on the call is Caleb. Caleb is the director of our budget. And the question in for Caleb is, if the general food tax is not renewed in November, does that impact the food tax rebate program?
Good evening, and thank you for that question. If the 3% general food tax is not renewed in November, the voters would not have a chance to renew it again until next year. If in the end the voters do not end up supporting renewing the 3% food tax, then the rebate program could be terminated because that program is currently funded by the food tax dollars. And that could leave many of our low-income neighbors without a critical resource to offset the rising cost of groceries.
Thanks, Caleb. Our next question, let's give this to Chief Kuznick. Chief, can you explain how will the safety tax be divided between police and fire?
Yeah, I want to thank you for that question. As fire chief and police chief, we share the priority in keeping our public safe. So Chief Turk and I will work together to identify priorities based off data that we receive from throughout the types of calls for service we're receiving in the community and the needs that our community has to make those decisions.
Thanks, Chief. Just checking to see if you have any other questions coming in. Okay, let's got one in here. This is for our Director of Public Works, Paul Chanmito. Paul, can you help explain how does the TIFIA loan work, and when would we start to repay that loan?
So TIFIA has some unique features to it, and one of them is the structure of the loan itself. Also being very low cost and long term, the funding cycle is typically 35 years, so they fund based off the life cycle of the infrastructure. In addition, the loan payment doesn't begin till after substantial completion of the project. So typically, you wouldn't begin paying principal and interest till about 4 to 5 years after completing the project.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
We do have another question, Paul, if you could stay on camera for us. What is driving these infrastructure projects? Is it current growth, projected growth, or the condition of the city's roads today?
It's currently, if you especially look at US 34 and 35th and 47th, and along some of our major corridors, you're seeing a lot of congestion occurring, and that has a lot to do with growth in the community. And so we're focused on really trying to get ahead, especially as more development is coming west. The sooner we make these improvements, it'll improve traffic safety and flow, and allow that development to happen in the future, while also not impacting those travel times. So we see a lot of improvements on these corridors immediately, and they will sustain themselves in the future.
Thanks, Paul. And as far as timeline, can you share when we would expect to, if we did go to ballot and this did pass come November, when we expect to get started on the 47th and 35th projects?
Yeah, if this ballot is passed, we would begin initial stages of final design on the project and moving into a contractual process in next year in 2025.
Okay. Question here, more, I guess, a matter of looking at priorities, putting funding towards street maintenance versus projects such as pools and recreation. I imagine this is a little bit of a combo between Caleb, Paul, and our Director of Culture, Parks, and Recreation, Diana Frick. But if we can maybe look at what is sort of the weight between putting money towards street maintenance and other projects for quality of life.
I'm
happy
take
to start
Go
with
ahead,
that
Caleb.
question. Yeah, so remember that Keep Greeley Moving is the city's 0.65% infrastructure tax, and that currently provides funding for transportation related repairs, improvements, and construction in the city. While food tax dollars aren't currently used for this type of street maintenance specifically, the food tax is the city's main source for capital maintenance, and that includes essential projects ranging from everything from traffic signals, public parking lots, restrooms in parks, roofs, HVAC systems in city buildings, and things like that. The food tax is also used to fund recreation facilities. These facilities see thousands of residents and young residents come through the doors. These are important centers for our community. They provide structured activity for our young people, keeping them out of trouble and in extracurricular activities. We see our soccer fields and sports fields full of families cheering on their kids at recreational sports, families having fun at the pools. These facilities and programs provide a sense of community. So certainly in the budget, there's a balance between all the different types of services that the city provides.
Thanks, Caleb. Diana, if you did want to chime in, I didn't want to cut you off, but I think Caleb handled that one well. Great. I think we have one more question. If you do have any other questions, please drop them in before we wrap up. This last question, Caleb, again, I think for you, does the food tax also cover subdivision sidewalks, or is that another program?
Generally, sidewalks maintenance is currently being covered out of the Keep Greeley Moving fund that I mentioned earlier, the 0.65. The food tax does cover a lot of other maintenance activities, which I talked about in the previous question, and is overall important for the city's budget in terms of making sure we have resources to continue providing a full spectrum of adequate resources to the community.
Thanks, Caleb. And I do actually have one more for our public safety friends. So can you share a little bit more specifically about what equipment would be purchased with the additional public safety tax?
Yeah, well, I'll just start out by saying that the top priority for the police and fire departments is to recruit new staff so that we can maintain adequate staffing levels. For the fire department specifically, we're looking to update technology like our thermal imaging cameras and self-contained breathing apparatus with technology that enhances firefighter safety and accountability.
And when I'll just add on from the police department, unfortunately, our equipment is very expensive, but with the addition of people, that also comes with ballistic protection, radios, tasers, body-worn cameras, in-car computers, license plate readers, and of the such that we can be more efficient with how we police.
Okay. I am not seeing any other questions, and so I want to go ahead and wrap it up. Want to make sure that we are respectful of your time, and as I mentioned, this is recorded and available online. You will be able to see that later tomorrow. Also, just a reminder, if you haven't, please feel free to sign up for City Scoop. That's where we send all updates citywide about what's happening. Follow us on social, visit us at greeley.gov.com. And specifically, if you want more information about these potential ballot measures, check out greeley.gov.com/funding-Greeley, and that will give you more information.